The regulators are, in my opinion, responsible for a colossal amount of the loss, perhaps as much as 25%. It would have been an easy matter to discover the extent of the fraud, because they were claiming that they were carrying out thousands of transactions every week on buying and selling shares and options on shares. And the reality was they had been doing no transactions at all.
Then what were they doing at the epicenter of that fraud, the Lipstick Building on 3rd Avenue? The two divisions of Madoff's firm, the stockbroking arm and the long con, were close together physically. But in other respects, they were worlds apart.
That's the 19th floor. The 19th and the 18th floor were the home of the broker-dealer side of the business, in fact, where they bought and sold shares. And that was a real firm that Madoff had started many, many years ago. The floor below that was the 17th floor, and that was his secret domain. From what I've been told, nobody was ever really allowed on that floor.
Almost no Madoff employees who were allowed on the 17th floor have talked. But one is prepared to meet Willard. Bob McMahon worked for Madoff for a year as a computer expert on the top 2 floors of Madoff's suite of offices. One day, he was allowed down onto the 17th floor.
It was as if 17 were a cave. It was a dark area, rooms were dark, there were piles of paper in boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling. There was green screen terminal technology, which I hadn't seen in 25 years. There were dot matrix printers, which I hadn't seen in 25 years. What was he doing with all this old school technology? Whenever I asked, one day it's going to die, what are you going to do then? And the response that I got, that's Bernie's problem. Bernie will make that decision. It's Bernie's. We don't question it. He wants to keep it, and that's the only answer. Hindsight being 20/20, now we know it was a criminal enterprise.
So why didn't he update the computers?
This would have required outside consultants to come in, and in doing so, the fraud would have been found out.
And this is what that computer on the 17th floor was producing: false share dealing records for Madoff's clients.
Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Mobil Oil.
Every time there was a trade, I would get several times a month thick envelopes. These are the trading tickets, and it tells you who the
That's Intel.
Widow Norma Hill invested directly with Bernie Madoff for 21 years. These statements are all fake. None of these share deals ever took place.
I lost over $1 million. I'll sell my house, I'll sell my belongings. But the way I look at it is, they're only things. And if I can reestablish my life, I'll be very lucky. I'll probably be one of the luckier ones.
The thing that's really struck me about my father as well, and all the other people we've met, they're just ordinary people who've been successful. And of course, the whole finance system is based on trust. And when an expert tells you something, you believe them.
Bernie was not a moral man. I mean, he took everybody's money, including his friends, his family, his relatives. I mean, everybody that came across his path. He was an equal opportunity thief, and he didn't care whose money he took.
What convinced you to stay with him all that time?
I got my statements every month, and they showed me that he was investing in a basket of stocks. They were all blue chips. And when the market was in a decline, he took the money and he put it into a treasury note. I mean, what can be safer than a United States treasury note?
I never really understood how Madoff got away with it until I saw those statements. They're just so routine, they're just so ordinary, they're just like any other utility bill or bank statement. I mean, you trust your bank statements, so in exactly the same way you trust those.
Richard Friedman trusted them, and he's a certified public accountant.
It was very routinely done. It was the case if we wanted money, we would send a fax or a letter to Madoff, and we'd get a check within a few days. There was never anything to be suspicious about. The prices on the statements or on the buy confirmation agreed with the newspaper ranges for that day. Same thing with the sales.
Right, so if he sold 10,000 shares of IBM for you, you'd get the
confirmation
saying 10,000 shares of IBM were sold, and that was for every stock that was supposedly bought and sold, and of course now we know nothing was bought and sold.
I haven't even yet been able to ascertain exactly how much money my father lost. Do you have a clearer idea of how much money you lost, if you don't mind me asking?
We lost $3 million. money that we had set aside to have a good retirement, money that we were able to save by living modestly throughout our lives. And it's all gone.
And it means that Richard will now struggle to keep a promise he made to his father.
My father told me, Rich, take care of Mom after I'm gone. It was pretty easy at first, but now it's difficult.
Richard's mother has Alzheimer's disease. She also lost money to Madoff, money which paid for round-the-clock care.
It's almost like Alzheimer's is sort of like a blessing to her because she doesn't understand that millions of dollars she once had are now gone. She doesn't have it anymore. And if she runs out of money completely, she'll have to sell the home that she's lived in for 55 years. We don't want that to happen to her because she'll never understand. She'll say, you're kicking me out of my home? How could you do that to me? If my father was alive today, to give you an idea how I feel, it would have destroyed him. It might have even put him in the same position as your father.
I'm drowning in paper at this point.
All of all these statements as well. US Treasury.
But the mountains of share trading certificates raise another question. Madoff claims that the scam was all his own work, and that's an awful lot of paper to shift every day.
I don't think it can possibly be done alone. There's too much paper, there were too many people involved, there were too many accounts, clients, and frankly, from what I'm told, Madoff was never in the office.
40% of the time I saw Bernie in the office. 60% of the time, what was he doing? Some of the time he was in the south of France. Some of the times he was probably meeting clients. Sometimes he was probably down in Palm Beach. But as a hands-on manager, I only saw him 40% of the time.
Certainly some of the clerks and junior people were directed to do some of the dirty work. Now, whether if they understood what that meant, I can't tell you. I haven't interviewed them. What I can feel very confident about is that the rest of the family members knew what was going on, or certainly knew that something was going on.
They include Madoff's wife, 2 sons, brother and niece. No evidence of wrongdoing has so far been leveled at any of them, but they've certainly got searching questions to answer. Madoff's brother Peter ran the office on a day-to-day basis.
He was an essential part of Bernard Madoff Securities. He was a tough negotiator. He was the guy who actually ran the firm. And when you talk to Bernie, you often talk to Peter. They were inseparable.
Madoff's niece, Shauna, also had a key role in the firm.
She was the compliance officer of the company. She was in the office 90% of the time. She wrote articles for trade journals. She went to Washington, D.C. She met with the SEC. She was always busy.
Madoff's sons Andrew and Mark also had senior roles. Mark in the particularly crucial role as head of trading. The stockbroking division was trading in securities, of course. But downstairs on the 17th floor, the Mark's billions weren't being used to buy and sell anything at all.
At some point, maybe the sons didn't know exactly what he was doing, but at some point they must have said, Dad, we're not doing it. We're not doing any trades. We're not doing any trades.
And then, of course, there's Bernie's wife, Ruth. She's become public enemy number 2, behind her husband, as she's been trying to cling on to a fortune of more than $60 million. While some of Madoff's victims face eviction, Ruth still lives here in this sumptuous duplex penthouse in one of the most expensive areas of Manhattan.
I know how smart she is, so she may have fooled herself that she didn't know, but she had to. She had to know that there was something, and she was there. She was in the office. I would find it hard to believe that she never went down to the 17th floor.
None of the family would comment, but in the past they have all denied any knowledge of Madoff's Ponzi scam. And Bernie may yet have the last laugh.
By pleading guilty and saying no one else is involved, it kind of stops, it kind of stops the prosecutors in their tracks. You don't quite know what to do about it. He doesn't have to go on the witness stand. He doesn't have to subject himself to being asked questions and having to prove where he was or how he did what he did, right? He doesn't have to say anything.
And he doesn't have to say where all the money's gone, either. Over the years, the Madoff family have spent plenty on themselves, of course. Bernie and Ruth had 4 homes valued at more than $20 million, plus boats and a private jet. Both his sons recently bought multi-million-dollar homes with loans from the firm, And just days before Bernie's arrest, Ruth withdrew $15 million from a Madoff-linked account. Then Bernie was caught trying to mail $1 million worth of jewelry to close members of the family while under house arrest. But what's happened to the rest of the cash?
If I were him, I would have gone ahead and I would have tried to make things disappear as much as possible. I would imagine that there is money that's squirreled away in various locations around the globe.
Here's Bernie in his penthouse apartment. He was confined here under house arrest before being remanded in custody. But he was allowed to make phone calls, which could have let him hide some of his ill-gotten gains. The hunt is now on.
What you have to do is kind of take yourself outside the documentation and think like a fraudster, quite honestly, and say, all right, where did Mr. Madoff spend his time? We know that he traveled overseas on a regular basis. Did he take a bag of cash with him? Or did, in fact, he wire transfer things from other accounts?
Madoff's already admitted to 3 counts of money laundering through his London office, and investigators are combing accounts throughout the world. More than $1 billion has been found, but that still leaves millions, possibly billions, unaccounted for. As Willard nears the end of his journey, he's no nearer finding the precious paperwork he needs to track down his father's investments with Madoff. But he's beginning to understand what turns a nice middle-class Jewish boy from Queens into the world's biggest fraudster.
It was not even being caught, but just being thought of as just another schmuck. It's a man who was running from mediocrity and winding up like his parents. He wanted out of that middle of the middle of the middle of the middle class.
Many people will say about Madoff and other Ponzi crooks as well that there was a point at which they decided to turn to the bad. I don't believe this. The Ponzi perp is a crook from the start. The psychology that goes into making them good at what they do requires them to be skeptical and cynical about legitimate business from the start.
And finally, for the $64 billion question, how did Bernie think he was going to get away with it? After all, every Ponzi crook knows their little scheme will collapse sooner or later. Well, Bernie's not talking. And who'd believe the world's biggest con man anyway?
They start to get a king complex, and they start to believe that nobody can touch them. And he probably at certain points thought that that was the case, that he had beaten the system.
One has to be almost a sociopath to be able to live this double life that he lived for the amount of years that he lived it, with this Damocles sword over your head. Can you imagine the pressure you're under trying to juggle all these books and pay out one client's money to another?
He's a criminal. He's a petty thief. Anyone can be a criminal. You can go out and steal a car and you're a criminal. That's what he is. That's his legacy. Asshole.
Tomorrow, a Manhattan judge is expected to sentence Bernard Madoff to a jail term, which will mean he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars.